somewhere behind the fog, past the last streetlight you have ever noticed, there is a city that only appears when the whole world has fallen asleep. Tonight, I am going to tell you how that city found its keeper and why he chose to stay hidden forever. And I promise you, by the time this story ends, you will never look at a glowing lamp the same way again. Settle in, pull the blanket up to your chin, and let your breathing slow, because this story begins a very long time ago. In the year 1704, when the fog first learned how to keep a secret, back then, sailors spoke of a harbor town that vanished at dawn and returned at dusk, a place the maps refused to remember. Okay, they called it Everlume, the city of 10,000 lanterns. Hey, and they said its light was warm enough to melt a bad dream right out of your head. Everlume was built in a valley shaped like a cupped hand, as if the earth itself had decided to hold something precious. Streets curled like ribbons around hills of slate and moss. And every single street, from the grandest boulevard to the thinnest alley, was lined with lanterns of hammered copper and sea glass. The lanterns did not burn oil. They burned something older. The people of Everlume called it hushlight, and it was made, so the old keepers said, from the last breath of a day well lived. Now, hushlight could not be bought and could not be stolen. It could only be gathered, one glimmer at a time, by lamplighters who had trained for years to coax it out of the evening air. There were once 400 lamplighters in Everlume. By the time our story truly begins, in the year 1892, there were only 2 left. One was an old woman named Marin Ashgrove. The other was a boy of 11 who did not yet know he mattered at all. The boy was called Orin Fenn, and he had grown up in the attic of a clock shop on Thimble Street. Raised by a kind but forgetful clockmaker who had found him one foggy morning asleep in a delivery basket meant for gears. Orin had no memory of his parents, so all he had of them was a small brass key on a cord around his neck, a key that fit no lock anyone had ever found. Kay, in a habit of waking at exactly 3 in the morning every night, as if something out in the dark were calling roll. Orin was not remarkable in any way the city could measure. He was not the fastest boy on Thimble Street, nor the strongest, nor the one the other children picked first for games. But he noticed things. He noticed when the widow on the corner ran out of firewood and stacked some by her door before she woke. He noticed when the baker's cat went missing and spent 3 nights finding it. He noticed, most of all, that one lantern at the end of his street had been dark for a week, and that the darkness around it seemed, somehow, to be growing. It was that dark lantern that changed everything. On the 3rd night of watching it, Orin crept out with a candle stub and a stepladder, determined to fix what no one else seemed to see, and as he reached the lantern, he found he was not alone. Standing beneath it, wrapped in a coat the color of midnight, was Marin Ashgrove, the last hid lamplighter of Everlume, holding a long brass pole tipped with a flame that did not flicker, even in the wind. Marin had been watching Orin for 112 nights, though he never knew it. She had watched him stack the firewood and find the cat, and stare at the dark lantern like it was a wound in the world. And she had begun to hope, carefully, the way you hope about the last match in the box, that the fog had finally sent her what she had been waiting 30 years to find. She did not explain any of that, of course, as she simply handed him the brass pole, nodded once at the dead lantern, and waited. Orin, hands shaking, lifted the flame to the C-class, and the moment the hushlight touched it, the lantern did not merely glow, it remembered. Light poured out of it in slow, golden waves, and inside the light, Orin saw pictures moving like fish under ice. He saw the street as it had been 50 years before. He saw dancers and snowfalls and a woman laughing under an umbrella. He saw that every lantern in Everlume was not just a light, but a keeper of everything that had ever happened beneath it. That was the night Orin Fenn learned the first secret of Everlume, the one written above the door of a school he had not yet seen. Light remembers, darkness forgets. And somewhere between the two, a lamplighter stands guard. Marin took him on as her apprentice the following morning, with the clockmaker's blessing and a breakfast of honey toast that Orin would remember for the rest of his life. And that is how, at the age of 11, an unremarkable boy from Thimble Street was led up 940 stone steps, through a gate shaped like a keyhole, into the Lantern Well, the hidden college of the quiet hours, where the keepers of Everlume had trained for 700 years. The Lantern Well was not like any school you have ever imagined, and I have heard you imagine some very good ones. It was carved into the inside of the tallest hill in Everlume. A spiral of classrooms and libraries and glowing workshops wound around a central well of pure hushlight that fell upward, like rain that had changed its mind. Moths of silver and pale gold drifted through the halls in slow constellations, and it was considered terrible manners to swat at them for reasons Orin would learn soon enough. Once, the Lantern Well had held 4 great orders of keepers founded by the 4 original wardens of Everlume. The Order of the Hearth tended the lights of homes. The Order of the Harbor guarded the lights of ships. The Order of the Crossing kept the lights of roads and bridges. And the Order of the Vigil, the oldest and strangest of the 4, kept the one light nobody ever saw, the light that held the fog itself in place around the city, hiding Everlume from a world that had grown too loud for it. But orders, like lanterns, can go dark. A sickness of forgetting had crept through the city over the last century, snuffing Lamplighters' gifts one by one, until the great halls of the Lantern Well stood nearly empty. Kay and Marin Ashgrove taught her lessons to a single student in rooms built for 400. She never told Orin why the others had faded. She only taught him, patiently, night after night, as if the whole future were sitting in that one small chair. Orin learned to gather hushlight from the seam of the evening, that thin violet moment between sunset and true dark. He learned to read the memories inside old lanterns, and to mend cracked sea glass with a whispered thank you. He learned the 206 lampposts of the Eastern District by heart, and the names of the streets beneath them, and the small sorrows and celebrations each lantern had witnessed. He was not the most talented apprentice the Lantern Well had ever seen. He was the most faithful, and in the quiet hours, faithfulness is its own kind of talent. And then, in the winter of his 14th year, on the night of the 21st of December, the longest night of the year, everything changed. The way everything always changes in stories like this, quietly, all at once. And beginning with the moth. Orin was alone in the archive of burned hours, the deepest library in the Lantern Well, shelving memory jars, when a silver moth, unlike any he had seen, came spiraling down through the dark. It was large as his 2 hands together, and its wings were not solid, but woven from threads of light, and it was hurt. One wing dragged a line of falling sparks behind it, like a comet losing itself. Orin did what Orin always did. He noticed, and he helped. He cupped the creature gently, breathed a little warmth over it, and pressed the smallest glimmer of his own gathered hushlight into its wounded wing. He did not know, because no one had told him, that this was no ordinary archive moth. It was a lumen moth, one of the last 7 in existence, born from the flame of the first lantern itself. The light the Order of the Vigil had guarded since the founding. And he did not know that a lumen moth, once helped, always repays the debt. The moth steadied, rose, circled his head 3 times in a ring of drifting light, and then, before he could flinch, landed softly on his brow and folded its wings. Warmth went through Orin like sunrise through a window. And when the moth lifted away and vanished up the dark of the stairwell, the boy who remained was not quite the boy who had been there a minute before. The gift of the moth settled into him slowly over the following days, and it came in 3 parts. He could see light where no one else could, the faint glow that clings to living things, 2 kind words, 2 old promises. He could move through darkness without a sound, the shadows sliding around him like water around a fish. And he could feel like a tug behind his ribs whenever a light somewhere in Everlume was about to go out. You might think a 14-year-old boy given such gifts would run straight to his teacher. Orin did not, and I will be honest with you, because this is a true story, and true stories are honest. He kept it secret, not out of wickedness, but out of a small, warm, dangerous pride. For the first time in his life, he was remarkable. He began slipping out at night, past his curfew, using his gifts for small showings off, relighting lamps with a snap of gathered glimmer, gliding along rooftops, letting himself be almost seen, a story for the morning papers, a shape in the fog the children of Everlume began to call the moth of Thimble Street. And while he was busy being almost seen, he stopped noticing. That is the part of the story I most wish I could change, even now, 'cause far below the city, in the drowned cellars where no lantern had burned for 200 years, something had felt the moth's gift pass into a boy, and it had begun, very patiently, to climb. The old keepers had a name for it, written in the oldest book in the archive of burned hours, on a page Marin had never let Orin read. They called it the gloam. It was not a monster, exactly, and that was the frightening thing. It was a forgetting that learned to walk. Every memory a lantern lost, every name that faded, every light that went out unmourned, fed it and gave it shape. It had been starving for 7 centuries, held back by the first lantern in the order of the vigil, but the order was gone now, down to 1 old woman and 1 distracted boy, and the gloam had grown strong enough, at last, to be hungry out loud. On the 3rd of January, in the year 1895, the lanterns of the harbor district went out. Not flickered, not faded, went out, all 418 of them between one bell and the next, and with them went the memories they held. Sailors woke unable to recall the names of their own ships. A grandmother forgot the lullaby she had sung for 60 years, mid-verse, and down at the end of the longest pier, where the dark now pooled like ink, the fog around Everlume, the fog that had hidden the city since its founding, developed its very first hole. Marin Ashgrove knew exactly what it meant. Orin watched her face as the news came, and he saw something he had never seen there before, which was fear, and something else he had also never seen, which was resolve, the deep kind. The kind people only wear when they've already decided what they are willing to pay. She told him the truth that night, all of it, the gloam, the vigil, the first lantern hidden at the bottom of the lantern well, whose flame was now the only thing keeping the forgetting from swallowing the whole city and every memory in it. And she told him one more thing. The first lantern was dying. It had burned for 700 years on the last breath of the founders themselves, and no one living knew how to feed it, because the secret of its flame had been lost when the order of the vigil faded. No one, she said, except perhaps the lumen moths, who had been born from that flame, and who had not been seen in the halls for a generation. Orin's heart turned over like a key in a lock. He opened his mouth to confess, and the tower bells began to scream. The gloam did not wait for confessions. It came up out of the harbor that very night, a tide of soft, silent gray that ate the light of the streets, one lamp at a time, and where it passed, people did not run or cry out. They simply stopped and looked around at their own city like polite strangers, unable to remember why any of it had ever mattered. Marin went out to meet it with her brass pole and her unflickering flame, because that is what the last head lamplighter of Everlume was for. She ordered Orin to stay in the lantern well, and Orin, for the first and last time in his life, disobeyed her out of love instead of pride. I will not pretend the battle on Thimble Street was grand, because it was not grand. It was one old woman holding up one small light against a dark the size of the sky. Behind the sleeping streets behind her a few more minutes of remembering. Orin arrived over the rooftops in time to see her flame gutter. He arrived in time to feel the tug behind his ribs. The one that told him a light was about to go out, and to understand, with the horror that had no bottom, that this time the light was a person. What happened next is argued about in Everlume to this day by the very few who know the story at all. Some say the boy burned brighter than the first lantern itself. Some say the gloam simply chose to retreat. But I was there, and I will tell you what I saw. I saw Orin Fenn stand over his fallen teacher and stop hiding. He opened up every glimmer he had ever gathered, every lantern memory he had ever read, every noticing kindness he had ever done, and he let it all shine out of him at once, not as a weapon, but as a remembering. It's a street lit up with 50 years of dances and snowfalls and laughing umbrellas. And the gloam, which cannot bear to be near anything so fiercely remembered, pulled back into the drains and the cellars, hissing like a tide going out. It was not victory. Marian Ashgrove's own light was too far gone. She spent her last hour in the attic of the clock shop where Orin had grown up, because she said it smelled like patience, and with her final breaths, she made her apprentice the 219th head lamplighter of Everlume, and the first warden of the vigil in 100 years. Her lantern went dark just before dawn on the 4th of January. Orin was 14 years old, and he was now the only lamplighter left in the world. I want you to breathe here slowly, the way Orin had to learn to breathe in the weeks that followed. In, gently, out, longer. Because grief, like fog, is something you can only move through at a walk. Orin did not become bitter, though the road to bitterness stood wide open and well lit. Instead, he made a vow, alone in the empty spiral of the lantern well, with only the drifting moths for witnesses. He vowed that no light in Everlume would ever again go out unnoticed. Not a lantern, not a memory, not a person. And he understood, finally and completely, the lesson his secret pride had hidden from him. A gift you keep for yourself is just a possession. A gift you spend on others is a light. And a light, once you carry it, comes with a duty as long as the night itself. He gave up the rooftop showings off. He gave up being the moth of Thimble Street, the almost seen marvel, the story in the morning papers. In fact, he gave up being seen at all. The city needed its keeper more than it needed its hero, and keepers, he decided, work best unthanked. So Orin Fenn let the people of Everlume slowly forget his name, which was the hardest gathering he ever did. And he became, instead, a rumor, a warmth, a repaired thing you could not remember breaking. But the gloam was not finished, and neither is our story. So keep your eyes closed and stay with me. The first lantern was still dying. Orin could feel it now, day and night, a great slow tug behind his ribs. And he knew that when it failed, the fog would fail, and the forgetting would come back for everything. He searched the archive of burned hours for 11 months. He read 4,000 memory jars. And in the end, the answer did not come from a book. It came, as answers so often do, from an old debt on silver wings. The lumen moth returned to him on the first night of December in the year 1895. And this time, it did not come alone. All 7 of the last lumen moths descended through the well of upward rain, and they led him down, past the deepest archive, past doors that had not opened in a century, to the chamber of the first lantern itself. It was smaller than he expected. Most true things are. A lantern of plain black iron, no bigger than a teapot, its flame worn down to a thread of gold. And there, written around its base in letters 700 years old. Orin finally read the secret the Order of the Vigil had died protecting. The first lantern did not burn oil or hushlight, or even the last breath of a day well lived. It burned willingness. It had been lit by 4 founders who each gave up something they could never take back. Their names in the wide world, their futures beyond the fog. so that a hidden city could exist where tired souls and lost things would always have somewhere soft to land. The flame was fed by sacrifice, freely given, and it had gone unfed for 100 years because no one had known and no one had been willing. Orin Fenn stood before that thread of gold for a long time. He thought about the brass key around his neck and the parents he would now never go looking for beyond the fog. He thought about the clockmaker and honey toast and Marin's unflickering flame. He thought about every lantern on every street, holding its little hoard of dances and snowfalls and lullabies. And then he took the key from around his neck, the only clue to who he had been or might have become out there in the loud world, and he gave it to the flame. The first lantern drank his offering, and it did not flare or blaze. It simply steadied, the way a heartbeat steadies, and grew warm, and settled in to burn for another 700 years. Far above, the hole in the fog closed like a healed wound. Down in the drowned cellars, the gloam felt the city remember itself, all at once, from the harbor to the hills, and it curled up small and slept, because even a walking forgetting cannot stay awake inside a place so thoroughly loved. And the moths, all 7, settled on Orin's shoulders like a mantle, which is how the last lamplighter of Everlume became something the old books had no name for. So the city, in whispers, invented one. The warden of the quiet hours, keeper of the lights you never see being kept. He is keeping them still, you know. That is the part of the story they never believe until they are very sleepy, which is exactly why I have saved it for now. Everlume never fell and never faded and never let itself be found. It is out there tonight, behind the fog, 10,000 lanterns strong, okay? And its warden still walks the ribbons of its streets, older now and slower, with silver in his hair to match the wings on his shoulders, noticing everything, unthanked, exactly as he vowed. And every so often, when the world on your side of the fog grows too loud, and someone lies awake at 3 in the morning, as if something out in the dark were calling roll, the warden feels a small tug behind his ribs, a light flickering, a person, not a lantern, and he gathers a glimmer of hushlight, the kind made from the last breath of a day well lived, and he sends it out through the fog on silver wings to find the window of whoever needs it most. It arrives as ordinary things, street lamp outside your curtains, glowing a little warmer than it should, a patch of moonlight that lands, somehow, right where your worry was sitting, the heavy, honeyed feeling behind your eyes right now as this story rounds its final turn. That is not a coincidence, little dreamer. That is a delivery, because here is the last secret, the one I have carried through this whole tale, waiting for the moment your breathing went slow and deep, just as it has now. I told you I was there on Thimble Street, the night Orin stopped hiding. I have been in every scene of this story. If you go back and look, I was the flame on Marin's brass pole that never flickered. I was the glow in the archive when the wounded moth came down. I am the light the warden has carried for 131 years, the lantern in his hand, and lanterns, as you now know, remember everything they shine upon. Tonight, he's shown me on you. So sleep now, and sleep deeply, because you are on the ledger of the quiet hours, and your light is being kept by someone very good at keeping. The fog will hold, the lanterns will burn. The warden will walk his rounds until the morning comes, noticing, mending, remembering on your behalf, so that you are free to forget everything for a while, which is all that sleep has ever asked of you. And if you dream tonight of a city in a valley shaped like a cupped hand, with copper lanterns, and upward rain, and a boy who traded his key for a flame, do not worry about remembering it when you wake. You do not have to. That is what the lanterns are for. Good night, from Everlume. The light is on, the warden is watching, and the whole quiet world, for the next few hours, is safely, softly, thoroughly remembered.